Hi everybody. Today I wanted to discuss the one learning strategy that I chose for teaching English language learners, and that is the language experience approach. So what the language experience approach is basically consists of the teacher and the students having a shared experience, and then later on referring to that experience and having the students orally explain their thoughts, their feelings, what they did during that experience, while the teacher records in writing, modeling correct writing skills on the board for every student to see. So why I chose the language experience approach, I find it to be easy to incorporate into a variety of subject areas, and it's also proven to be effective for not only English language learners but also all learners. And I also agree with that. I think if I were to reflect on my elementary school experiences or even in middle school, I would typically, maybe it's just me, but I typically remember the hands-on or meaningful experiences rather than just, filling out a worksheet or anything like that. So for my particular lesson, I incorporated the language experience approach into a first grade science lesson. More specifically, I focused on the parts of a plant and its functions, because I know that from the PA state standards that first graders are expected to know the parts of a plant and its functions at that age. So for the shared experience part of the lesson, this could be, either the previous day or the same day. But for my particular lesson, it was the same day. But my thoughts were the students are going to the school garden with the teacher, and I'm going to instruct them or, teach them about all the different parts of a plant, while helping them make that connection with the real life plants in front of them in the garden, and also a diagram that I provided them with. So for my particular classroom, my English language learners' native language is Spanish. So a lot of my visual representations I labeled in both Spanish and English to help those learners make the connections between the languages. So as an example, a plant diagram in both Spanish and English, and then students would use this during the shared experience, to identify the parts of the plants, but also in the language experience approach that I will discuss in the future. Later. But so the students, are the identifying the parts of a plant, planting new seeds, upkeeping existing plants throughout this experience. And while they're doing that, research suggests that teachers should take pictures, with the students in them with that experience or what they're doing, whether it just be patting soil, planting seeds, or even just like pointing to parts of plants. So that'll become useful in your language experience approach also. So with that being said, I would then have the students return to the classroom, and I would display on the board the variety of pictures that I have of the students working in the garden, the visual diagram of the plant, and for example, the pictures, I just printed out some pictures of some students gardening. And obviously for your classroom experience, you would want your real students in those pictures. That way they can, see themselves in the images, and they're better able to recall or remember what they did or how they felt about what they did and all of that. So just another example. So you would display that along with the diagram I already showed you on the board, so that every student can see and they can refer to that when they are orally explaining their thoughts. Another thing to display, and it is important to acknowledge, is the vocabulary or unfamiliar words that the new vocabulary words that students are unfamiliar with, that they need to understand to be able to also understand the content that you're being taught. So for this particular lesson, I found my vocabulary words to be seed and reproduction. So I would define these words, redefine them, and display them on the board in their definition, so the students are able to, refer to that as a reference. But in this particular lesson, I didn't incorporate seeds into the parts of the plants because we just were discussing that. But obviously students need to be able to understand what a seed is and how that is involved with a plant, and like how a seed is a reproduction unit for a plant, and how, you know, the flower relates to that. So, I mean, although they're not, you know, the parts of the plants that, you know, the objectives need students to understand, but they're just unfamiliar words that the students also need to be able to understand, you know, the parts of the plant. But so you display all this information for the students, and then you would use this as like visual cues to prompt the students in orally explaining their thoughts. So one thing, I mean, a question you could start with, just as an example, is like, what did we do yesterday, or what did we do earlier today? And although that's vague, it gets student thinking. You know, they could say, we went to the garden. And once a student says that, you would write that on the board, you know, clearly for everyone to see, and be sure to model, you know, correct capitalization, directionality, punctuation, spelling, all of that. So that way students can make that connection between the spoken language, like what they're speaking is different from what they're seeing written on the board, or it's the same, or whatever. And yeah, and then you would obviously ask more focused questions moving forward, like what parts of the plants did we discuss, or how would we explain our experiences to a student that wasn't there? And that would just have students, you know, use more expressive language to be able to add to that text that they're constructing. And then obviously after the text is constructed, you would review it, you know, underline any vocabulary words that you see, make references to the images, and to anything you learned in that lesson. So you'd also read it. So the teacher reads the text to the students reread it as a class together, and that also, you know, promotes comprehension and reading skills, but also makes that connection between the reading and writing and spoken language. You know, they all have some sort of relationship to each other in language. More about the language experience approach that I found through research is that it is especially helpful in helping young English language learners, to develop that language connection, or make those connections between, you know, reading, writing, and all of that. But I also found it interesting because I found some research that, you know, incorporated the language experience approach into older student lessons. So, I mean, obviously that would be less of the teacher recording the information and more of like the students actually having that ability to, you know, write themselves, which is why it's definitely helpful in younger learners, because, you know, students at first grade or kindergarten, they don't always have those fine motor skills to be able to write their thoughts and feelings by themselves, or they don't have, you know, the language that they need to express that in writing. So it's definitely especially helpful for younger learners, but I thought it was interesting that you could also incorporate that into, you know, lessons for older learners. I also found it interesting that you could, you know, incorporate the language experience approach into a variety of different content areas. And I mean, that's obviously, that's another reason as to why I found it to be so, you know, useful and effective for all learners, for all subject areas. And I found that some people even used it in like a unit, like throughout each unit. I definitely find that to be effective also. So with everything that I said, I definitely plan to use this approach in my future, and not only because it's for English language learners, but it's for all learners, and especially helpful for English language learners. And I can say that I'm better able to use it now, and I hope that everything that I said is helpful, and I hope that it encourages everyone to also use this approach in their future. Regardless of how you use it, I think implementing it is the best option. So, yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.